Topo Athletic is committed to lifelong health and better movement. Topo builds running shoes for those who get out there every day, regardless of weather, speed, energy, or mood. Their distinctive fit and feel combines instinctive human movement with modern performance and lightweight comfort to help you keep going, keep trying, and keep moving. Discover the Topo difference and step into a run experience unlike any other.
Jackie, thank you for joining us today on our Tuesday Fireside Chats. We just gave a little brief introduction of who we are and love for you to tell the audience who you are so that we can get into the questions.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie, and I am a registered dietitian. I have my own business called Enduura Nutrition. I focus on endurance athletes and specifically endurance athletes with disordered eating. And I really focus on sustainable nutrition for the athlete. So that's kind of who I am and what I do. I love to run. I focus on marathons, and I've done a few ultras as well. I ran in college. So that's my passion. I love it. I have a little boy that's almost 3, and obviously my husband as well. And we live in Ogden, Utah.
And folks, Jackie just ran a 36-mile trail race and a half marathon over the last 2 weeks. So when she talks about nutrition, she is coming from the same spot that you are as an athlete. So she knows what she's talking about. So get those questions in there. And I actually was going to start with a series of questions, Jackie, but we have one from the audience already. It's from Harley Ann Moody, and she's asking about an example of fueling plan for a marathon, how often to fuel, what to take. And I know there's a lot of nuance in there. So general overall information for that type of scenario.
Perfect. Yep. And you hit the nail on the head. There is a lot of nuance. What works for me isn't necessarily going to work for every single other person, but there are general recommendations. So I really like to look at fueling for a race in hour increments. That's how most of the recommendations are based, and it just helps you be able to stay more accurate when you switch up your fueling sources. Instead of saying, I'm going to have a gel every 30 to 45 minutes, say, I'm going to have this many carbohydrates per hour, because one gel might only have 15 grams of carbohydrate and another gel may have 45. And so it just makes it more accurate that way. I like to look at 4 main things when I'm planning out each hour. Number 1, carbohydrates. Number 2, your sodium intake. Number 3, your fluid intake. And then number 4, your caffeine intake. So for carbohydrates, you want to stick, the range is pretty wide, okay? So minimum, we want to do about 30 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And if you're only able to handle that much at first, that's a good place to start. This is where most people I work with are kind of naturally at. And then we gradually build them up to be able to tolerate more. So be patient with yourself in that process. Up to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So a general rule of thumb is that the longer you're going, the more carbohydrate per hour you're going to need to be able to have it be beneficial to your performance. So anything over 3 to 4 hours, going between 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour is going to be more beneficial than if you're doing under 3 hours. You can probably stick closer to 30 to 60 and be just fine. Go ahead.
The speed play into that. So somebody running a 7-minute mile for 3 to 4 hours versus somebody running a 14-minute mile for 3 to 4 hours. Does speed play a role in that?
So not necessarily in the sense that you're talking about. I would look at it more in your effort, right? So if for you a 7-minute mile is really easy, then that's going to be an easy effort run. It's not going to be putting your body at a high intensity level where you need a lot more fuel, right? But for someone that 7-minute pace is their race pace, they're going to need to be taking in more fuel because their body is putting in that effort. So it's really more about your effort. So if you're giving a race day effort, then I definitely want you to be fueling for anything over an hour for a race. So for me, my half marathon is about 75 minutes. Normally in a 75-minute run, that's easy. I don't worry about fueling. But in a 75-minute half marathon, I definitely bring fuel because the intensity is higher, if that answers your question.
Yeah, so for the folks that are watching this, when we started this conversation, we talked about it's a broad range. It's an umbrella question. It really depends on who you are, what you're working on, your level of fitness. And working with a person like Jackie, a registered dietitian, is super important in that scenario, right? Because they're going to be able to identify areas where you can work on improving your caloric intake, your liquid intake and things along those lines. So make sure you check out working with somebody like Jackie. So I'm going to go back to my original question, which was, what is the one question that you always get when you get new clients? They're either new to the sport or they're new to working with a nutritionist.
Awesome. So there are quite a few questions that I feel like I get on repeat, but one that always makes me go, oh yeah, I need to make a handout for this is, what are good meals and snacks? I just am so lost when it comes to those kinds of ideas, and I need some ideas. So what I like to do with people is to teach them about a very simple trick. And this trick is, for every meal, I want you to include a color, a carb, and a protein. So your color is going to be your fruits and vegetables, your carbohydrates, grains, pastas, potatoes, cereal, those kinds of things. And then protein, any dairy foods, meat, beans, peanut butter, nuts, seeds, et cetera, right? And I think this is a really easy way to be able to plan things out when you're in a pinch. So it's like, I have no idea what to have for lunch. I personally hate lunch. It's my least favorite meal. But I can piece together a balanced meal by saying, okay, we have some grilled chicken in the fridge and a salad, but I also need some carbohydrates. So I'm going to add some quinoa to it, and then I have a balanced meal. So that's an easy way to do it. For snacks, I want you to choose 2 of those components and pair those together. So, all right, I'm having carrots. That's great, but what could we pair carrots with to make it more balanced, more complete? Hummus, a cheese stick, some nuts, something along those lines.
All right, so what were the 3 things again? Color, carb, and
protein.
Protein. Okay. So that should have been easy. So keep that in mind, folks. And that's from meal. And then from snack, it's 2 out of those 3 things. Correct?
Yep. Absolutely.
So one of the things that we hear and we see, and I've been involved in these endurance sports for about 15 years now. And one of the first myths I ever encountered, I guess I could say, is going vegetarian/vegan is, where are you going to get your protein type of thing, like as if protein doesn't exist outside of meat. And so what food myth do you find yourself constantly debunking with clients, or just like you said, in handouts, that type of thing?
Yeah, I have a lot, and I'd even change the word from a food myth to even like food rules that people have that are just things that people do, and they're like, I always have to do this, and it doesn't really even make sense. So a common one is it okay to eat past a certain time at night? That's a really common one I get. And the answer is, yeah, it's totally fine. Your body doesn't shut down at a certain time and, just absolutely not digest things, right? I think lots of the food rule to not eat late at night comes from, maybe we don't make the best food choices at night, or maybe we're overeating a little bit and we're just, being a little bit emotional or something along those lines, right? So yeah, those kinds of situations are not ideal. But as an athlete with higher energy needs than most people, it's really important that you give yourself as many opportunities to eat throughout the day as you need to be able to meet your energy needs. And for most athletes, you need a bedtime snack to be able to meet those needs. Bedtime snacks are also really helpful for athletes in helping with the recovery process. If you give yourself a high protein bedtime snack, that can really help your muscles adapt and be able to build back and recover while you're sleeping, because that's when most of the repair happens, is during sleep. So particularly on a hard workout day or a really long effort day, if you're doing a long ride or a long run, that's when I would have that high protein bedtime snack. So it really can be beneficial if your body needs it. And you don't need to be afraid of eating later at night if your body needs it. Obviously be mindful and, make good choices, and, but it's totally fine to have ice cream or a cookie or whatever too, right? But just make sure that it's something that you need and it's meeting your needs. So
it falls along the lines of what we hear often, right? Which is intuitive eating, right? So if you're hungry, eat. Would that be like a good rule of thumb?
Absolutely. So athletes definitely need to trust every hunger cue that they get, right? Because when we're putting ourselves through these hard efforts, we actually have a delayed sense of hunger. I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience where you finish a really long run or a long ride and you come home and you're just like, I am not in the mood for food, right? And maybe your stomach feels a little off throughout that whole day, but then you're really hungry the next day. right? So our body makes up for it. So absolutely trust your hunger cues, but also we have to use practical hunger a little bit too to tell us, hey, I'm not hungry right now, but I know I need to give myself something to help me recover, or I need to eat something now because I have a workout later tonight that I need to be fueled for. And so we have to kind of use a balance between those things.
And this kind of puts me into the thought process about just timing, right? The idea that you have to have breakfast at 7 a.m. and then lunch at noon and then dinner at 6 p.m., right? And I know that revolved around, people working at plants back in the 40s and 50s, and today we're working from home. So how do you work with clients in that setting, in that situation? Like, hey, you need to, intuitively, regardless of what the clock says.
Totally. So this is definitely a process. It's really easy to get in our minds like, I can't eat breakfast until a certain time, or I can't eat lunch until a certain time. But I did challenge you to experiment with it. And this is what I do with my clients is, if you feel really hungry at 10:30 in the morning, try eating something and see what happens throughout the rest of the day. And 9.9 times out of 10, people are like, I just regulated myself, right? You eat a little bit more when you're feeling hungry, and then maybe you're actually totally fine and satisfied when lunch rolls around and you don't feel like you're missing out on anything. You eat again when you're hungry, and your body is really smart at, regulating itself if we learn to trust it. And it's just good to keep our brain happy and fed too. When our brain is happy and fed and our body's happy and fed, we're not thinking about food all the time, and it's actually easier to make good decisions and, actually listen to our body with the amounts and portions we need.
Awesome. By the way, we just had a comment from Smart Home Coaching, said, yay, Jackie. So give them a clap back at some point. Folks, if you have questions, make sure you hit the little question mark on the bottom right so that we can get them asked for you and answered by Jackie. It's summer. It is middle of August. It is 100 plus degrees here in Arizona. But well-wishing tells me that fall is on the way. You've written an article for us about seasonal eating for summer. As we start moving closer and closer to fall, football season's around the corner too. What should we be looking to add to our diets as we're training for either late season marathons or late season Ironman races, trail running events, that kind of stuff?
Totally. So eating seasonally is kind of a cool concept. And basically it just helps provide variety in our diet throughout the whole year. So picking fruits and vegetables in particular that are ripe and are, able to be saved at certain times of the year, as if you were growing your own garden, is a good way to think about it. Obviously, we have grocery stores and we can kind of have whatever food we want throughout the year, and that's also a blessing, right? In Arizona, I don't think you're growing very much right now, so it's a good thing you go to the grocery store. But, fall's a really great time for peaches and apples, at least in Utah. This is what I'm thinking of. Tomatoes are in season, up until the end of September. And then, lots of your potatoes and squash and things like that. Potatoes and squash, I love for athletes because they're a really great starch source and gives you good carbohydrates. They're a good base with like vegetable-y dishes, adds flavor. Tonight I had spaghetti squash with like asparagus and artichokes and like a cool little creamy sauce on top. Anyways, it was really good and tasty and something different, right? It adds some variety to my diet. And so variety is one of those things that is really good for overall health. Make sure that we get all of our micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals. And so those are kind of the things I would think of in the fall. And of course, don't forget the pumpkin spice because it's fall. So,
which brings me to, as you were talking, I just thought about like, is it possible for us to fall into a food rut where we're just eating the same thing constantly? And right alongside of those things, that same question though is, what should be a staple in our diet? What food products should be staples in our diets?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So when it comes to staples, I'd really go back to that first question that we talked about, was the color, the carb, and the protein. We don't want to vary our diet by taking out carbohydrates at some points and, taking out fruits and vegetables at other points. So that's our staple, but rotating the kinds of those different food groups is helpful. So instead of rice, you could try quinoa or couscous or polenta and have basically the same dish, right? So you don't have to like get super creative or have to look up crazy recipes. Just switch it up with your meat. Try adding turkey or ground beef or chicken or fish or whatever you don't usually have. Plant-based sources of protein are great too, tofu, tempeh, that kind of thing, just to switch it up and get variety. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Because one of the things, you can tend to do when you go to a grocery store, and I love to cook, so doesn't fall under my umbrella, but people can go to a grocery store, just pick out the same thing constantly, right? And it might fit into that color, carbon, protein, but if it's constantly the same thing, does that help them? Is that, or is the variety within that same framework also important too?
Yes and yes. So when we look at like nutrition priorities for an athlete in a pyramid, at the base of that pyramid, the most important part is just to make sure that we're eating enough, period, and to make sure that we're getting the right macronutrient distributions. Once we have that figured out, then we can add on like variety and timing and maybe supplements and things like that that are going to be beneficial to our performance. But at the core, we just need to make sure we're eating enough. So if you're in a food rut and you're having a hard time getting enough food, period, I don't want you to worry about variety right now. I want you to worry about getting enough food first and, making sure that you do get enough carbohydrate, you do get enough protein, even if it's the same food every single day. But once you have that down, then I would love for you to start adding in variety and, challenging yourself with new kinds of foods. So it's a hierarchy for sure.
Yeah. And like Smart Home Coaching posted up there, like we need variety too. Like for me, I enjoy eating from different cultures, Italy, Ethiopia, Spain, just finding different cultures to eat from and making, Google search a recipe and be able to incorporate different foods. We do have a question from Harley Ann Moody who asks, do you recommend iron supplements for endurance runners? I believe it's she is taking one, but doesn't know if she needs to.
Awesome. This is a really good question. And I was also thinking about answering this for the, what question do you always get? So iron and iron deficiency is really common with runners for a couple of reasons. Especially if you're at high altitude, you have higher demands for oxygen. So that increases your risk. When we're running, we break the red blood cells on the bottom of our feet. That's called foot strike hemolysis. So that's one hypothesis of why distance runners have a hard time keeping their iron up. If you're a female and you have menstrual cycles, that obviously contributes. Crohn's disease, celiac disease, those kinds of things contribute as well. If you're growing or you're pregnant, like any period of growth is going to increase your needs for iron. So it's really common. Should you have an iron supplement? Definitely not a blanket statement. Yes, everyone should be on an iron supplement because it depends on how well your body absorbs iron, and it also depends on what foods you typically have. And you can get into iron toxicity. There are some vitamins like vitamin C that you just pee out the excess. So it's really okay if you overdose. It just is expensive pee, right? But with iron, if you get into iron toxicity, you actually have very similar symptoms as iron deficiency, fatigue, and you feel lethargic and all of those things. And it's a lot harder to bring those stores down than to, get them up, essentially. So what I would recommend is getting tested, and you can get blood work done just from your doctor or, inside trackers everywhere on social media. I'm sure you've seen it. I also have a code. So if you need something, then anyone can message me and I have a code for you to use to get a discount. But getting tested at least, ideally you'd get tested like every 3 to 4 months, but I don't know too many people that have that kind of pocket change just to, get lab work done routinely like that. So at the beginning of a training cycle and the end of the training cycle is a really good time to get a base of where you're at. And that can help you determine, hey, do I need more iron? Do I need less iron? That kind of thing. I think iron supplements are a great way to boost your iron stores, just because sometimes it's really hard to get enough from food because there are so many interactions. Definitely try to get iron from food, right? Increase your red meat intake and pair that with a vitamin C source so that it's absorbed better. But if you don't have red meat, for example, or you don't have it very often, it can be really difficult to get enough. So I really like the brand Hemoplex for iron supplements. It has kind of everything in there that takes care of anemia. It has vitamin C, it has folate, it has B12, so it addresses all types of anemia, but definitely get it rechecked just to make sure that you're not going to get into levels of toxicity.
Awesome. For those of you who are just joining us, again, my name is Jason Bahamudi. I'm one of the co-owners of Run, Try, Bike. We're being joined today by Jackie Hendrickson on our Tuesday fireside chats, which happen every Tuesday. If you're just joining us, don't worry about it. You can find it on our Instagram feed when the conversation is over, as well as on our website and YouTube. I believe this is our 19th conversation. All previous 18 conversations are also on our website and YouTube, so go back and check some of those out. We did have Stevie Lynn a few months ago, who is also a nutritionist, and we talk a lot about this stuff as well with her, so check that out. And it is smart home canning, as I've been corrected, not smart home coaching. So I hope I corrected that for you folks. I'm getting old. It's hard to read these little letters, okay? Also, if you have a question for Jackie, just hit the little question mark on the bottom right side of your screen, and I will get that addressed for you. And when I first started in these sports, Jackie, one of the things that I started to use was gels. I found them to be too messy. I found them to be inconvenient to carry. And so then I just started making concentrated bottles of liquid nutrition, basically. Do you find one is better than the other? How do you work with athletes as they're trying to explore whether it's liquids or solids for training and racing?
Totally. Good question. So when we're training, the main nutrient we want to focus on is carbohydrate. And that's because that's the main energy source that our body is using, right? When we get into really long ultras and Ironman, for example, or something longer than like 5 hours, your body's going to be using more fat as an energy source. So, you know, that's something that you're going to have to incorporate as well. But topic for another question, probably. So we have gels, and that's a great source of carbohydrate. We have chews, kind of like those glorified fruit snacks, but some of them have like electrolytes in them and stuff. We have the high carb drinks, like you mentioned, and lots of those have electrolytes. So, you know, Gatorade, Tailwind, Scratch, those are good options. And then even real food options. We have to consider all of those as a good fueling source. So, you know, real food options, potatoes, roasted potatoes, applesauce. You could do sandwich or like little energy bites, dates. You know, people get really creative. So really it comes down to what feels best for you, is really what it comes down to, and what is going to support your goals. So, you know, if you're running a marathon and you're trying to run as fast as you can, carrying roasted potatoes probably is not going to be the easiest way for you to get your nutrition, right? And so you have to consider that as well, and experiment, be willing to try new things. So a couple of things, all of those work, and really what I want you to focus on for the most part is the carbohydrate content per hour, like we were talking about. But one thing to consider is that for people with a sensitive gut, we have to remember that there is a different osmolality for some foods than, let me back up and just explain what osmolality is. So osmolality is the concentration of solutes that are in your blood, okay? So if we put a solution, I'll use Gatorade as an example because it's a good example. It has a lot of carbohydrate, a lot of sugar, and a lot of electrolytes, right? And we put that into our gut. It has a higher concentration of solutes than our blood does. And our body really likes to create homeostasis, things to be equal. And so it has to dilute that concentration of food that we put in our stomach or the drink, in order to create that homeostasis. Sometimes that process can create a little bit of GI distress if you are, you know, pulling some of the water from your gut to be able to dilute whatever you're putting in your system. So if you've ever had like a goo gel on an empty stomach without taking it with water, you know what I'm talking about. And so playing around with that is important. So that would be my main consideration when trying to decide, should I do gel, should I do solids? Try and avoid some things some of those foods that have that really high concentration. If you're not able to dilute it with water, stick to more real food options if you have a really sensitive stomach, and see if that helps. If you have any other questions specifically with that.
Yeah, I would tell people also, right, that don't be afraid to try new things. I was not I didn't use chews very often. And then just this past 18 months, I guess you could say, I started to incorporate them more into my training, because they weren't like liquidy like a gel would be. And I was able to have something in my mouth where I could chew, especially on long trail runs. I was introduced to Cliff Blocks. I think it's called Tropical Punch or something, but it tastes like Kool-Aid. So if you can find those, folks, they are fantastic. And then the other thing, especially for long events, for me, 50-mile races, 100-mile races, is not being afraid to change my food source and my fuel source, I should say, during the event. So 2 years ago, I raced Cocodona, and I had like just this awful sugary mouthfeel, and I just could not take any more gels. Like I was done with them. So I literally had basically cold oats in a Ziploc bag that I would just squeeze out every now and again. And, you know, and I'm telling you this story, folks, so that you can realize, like, you don't have to just follow one method for your entire time that you're participating in these endurance sports. Like, test things out, try things out, listen to what Jackie says about, 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrates, and they can come from different sources. So just be aware of that as you're out there training and racing. And so go ahead.
I was just going to add that, every race that I've done has been slightly different with my fueling. I also like to change things up for training versus racing. Like, for example, my husband and I have been using PTOs for our, training lately, because it's been more fun and more casual. I'm able to stop, I'm able to eat it, and it's a butt ton cheaper than buying, Martin or Spring gels. So it's good to kind of have a mix of and variety of things that you can tolerate.
Yeah, and if you're a triathlete, especially if you're going long course, Ironman distance, and you can stomach it, I love Uncrustables. Like, that's where I first learned to eat them, was on the bike, eating Uncrustables, peanut butter and jelly, in a simple to carry pouch. And then when I started racing trails and ultras, they're the perfect fuel source for me, because you can walk and eat at the same time. So constantly testing things out. I mean, honestly, at Cocodona, I had an Impossible Burger. I mean, we're running for 5 days straight, so might as well eat all kinds of different things that you can. And so that's, we talk about fueling during the race. So now you're either done with the race or a workout. What's your go-to workout meal and why? And then what do you train or coach or work with your athletes to look for in a post-workout meal?
Awesome question. So post-workout meal, my favorites. Lately, I've been really liking like a bowl of Greek yogurt with granola and oats and fruit. I often like mixed peanut butter in there too. That's one of my favorites. So what you want to look at for a post-workout meal is making sure that you have mostly carbohydrates, because that's what our body has burned, and we need to replenish those glycogen stores, right? But we also want to add in a little bit of protein this time, because our body is ready and willing to accept protein in order to help our muscles rebuild and repair. And if we give our body the protein that it needs, then it stimulates that growth and repair process to happen more quickly than if we delay the recovery of nutrition. So within about 2 hours, we want to get a good meal in. It's a pretty big window, but it can go by really fast if you finish and then you're driving an hour back home, and then you come and lay on the couch for a while, and then you're like, oh my gosh, it's already been 2.5 hours since I last finished my run, and I haven't eaten anything. So I recommend that athletes try and get something in as soon as possible, and you'll probably feel better in general, not have to deal with any lightheadedness or anything like that if you can get something in sooner than later, but for sure within 2 hours. So you're going to be looking for about a 3-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein. If you're looking for a quick snack, say you're not in the mood to eat, or you're on the go and you need something in your car, chocolate milk is a really good option. There's packaged chocolate milk, and the reason why chocolate milk is so great is because it not only has protein from the milk, but it has the extra carbohydrates from the sugar that makes it chocolate, right? And so that's a key component that I work with on athletes, is helping them add those carbohydrates in, because so many of us are just like, yeah, I have protein shakes in the car, which is great, but so many of them have, very little carbohydrate in it. So you might be getting your protein from there, but what can we add to give you the carbohydrate you need? Maybe you add, a granola bar, a banana, something that's simple and easy, but make sure you have both of those components in there.
Hey folks, our time is gone by really fast. We're already 30 minutes in this conversation. So if you have a question for Jackie, make sure you drop it in on the bottom right-hand side. There's a little question mark. Put it in there. We'll make sure we'll get it answered for you. One of the things that, as I've gotten older, I'm getting closer to 50 these days, and my fueling has changed, as I mentioned earlier. How do you work with clients from whether it's different age groups and categories, and then within that, right? We all know endurance sports you can see athletes who are undernourishing themselves. And how do you work with an athlete who is basically under fueling during training and racing? And then how do you adjust that? And what do you see when age starts to play a role into that as well?
Good question. So all the same principles are going to apply from whether you are 16 or whether you're 60 and you're an athlete, right? But the main thing when you age is that you do need to increase your protein intake. So post-workout protein, I didn't give you an exact number, but for most people, around 20 grams is going to be adequate if you are under 30, okay? But if you're more closer to 40 or older, then we have to give our body more protein in order for us to be able to be efficient at using the protein that we give it to get that same muscle protein stimulus. So you'd want to be closer to 30 to 40 grams of protein when you're older. And that just helps you be able to, preserve any lean body mass that you have as well. So that's kind of the main thing that changes when you're older. Energy needs, as far as underfueling, it can happen at all ages as well. So I think it's really common for people to get frustrated when they get older, that, hey, my body is changing, my body composition is changing, I just need to totally restrict everything, right? And number one, we have to accept that our bodies change as we age. It's not just puberty and then you're how you should be from your high school body for the rest of your life, and then all of a sudden you're a grandma, right? There's a process that changes your body throughout that whole time. And so number one, we have to accept that. Number two, what we found through research is that energy changes as we get older, like the amount of energy you need, the amount of calories you need, really doesn't change as much as we think it does if you're able to keep that same activity level that you had previously. What we notice is that, yeah, when you're 60, you might not have as high of a activity level because maybe your knees hurt or you're just not in competitive training as much anymore or things like that. And that's the main contributor to your lower energy needs, more than if you were able to keep up that same activity level. So if you're still competing and you're, active and you're increasing your activity level even when you're older, kudos to you. That's my goals too. But know that your energy needs are still going to be high, and you can trust your hunger cues still and all of that.
But you just brought something up that made me think of another question. So as I've gotten older, I'm finding myself strength training more, right? Trying to offset the loss of muscle mass. Is there something that, from a nutritional standpoint, that's different when you've got more strength training in versus more cardio work like swimming, cycling, and running, that we need to pay attention to?
Mm-hmm. Yep. The main thing that changes is your protein intake. So it doesn't necessarily change your total caloric intake unless you're adding on extra activity on top of everything that you've been doing, right? But just kind of the proportion. So say you take out some of your swimming and biking and add in strength training instead, you just, take out a little bit of your carbohydrates and add a little bit more protein. This could look like, instead of a portion of pasta this big and a piece of meat this big, a piece of meat this big, and, pasta about the same size. Like, it doesn't have to be super meticulous, but the actual recommendation is about 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram for an endurance athlete. And then 1.4 to 1.6 for a strength-based athlete. So there's a little bit of overlap there, but the main thing is a little bit more protein.
We're gonna have to put a calculator on our website so that people can make that adjustment for 1.2 kilograms, so they understand per body what their body weight would be from a pounds perspective as well. And you also were talking about 30 grams to 90 grams of carbohydrates, which, if I'm not mistaken from my earlier days, it's 4 calories per gram for carbohydrates, right?
Correct. Yep.
You're looking at information on the back of a package, folks. 30 grams is equivalent to 120 calories. One of the things that those companies that produce the gel-like packets is those things are specifically designed for these types of events. And so they're typically going to fit right into that window. But obviously, make sure you look at the back of the pack and look at the ingredients that are on there as well. Before we jump into our sort of rapid fire segment, is there something we didn't talk about that you absolutely need to make sure people at home understand and know before we start having a little bit more fun with this?
Sure. I'll elaborate a little bit more on your question about underfueling. I didn't totally address that. Just that is probably the main problem I see with athletes. I have yet to tell someone that I've worked with that, hey, you need to cut your food intake down a little bit.
Okay.
And so that's just a really important piece to our performance as athletes. When we're underfueling, it's like our body goes into low power mode. If you compare that to our phone. So when your phone is on low power mode, it still works. You're still able to send text messages, make phone calls, look at pictures, things like that. But some of those background things are not happening. Your light may be dim, your apps aren't refreshing, maybe your photos aren't uploading to iCloud, right? And those are important overall, but for a little piece of time at nighttime, like, it's not a big deal. But if we're constantly underfueling and trying to, pursue less is more, essentially, right, when it comes to our body, trying to shrink it, then our bodies are going to be in that same situation. We're still probably going to be able to do all of our workouts. We're going to be able to go to work and be around people. But some of those background things in our body are not going to be happening. Our body's not going to focus on building muscle when it's trying to focus on survival, right? That is very, very menial to it. It's not going to focus on, supporting our hormones. So, you may lose your period or notice a change in your sexual function for men and for women. And your mood is going to be off. Like, all these things can happen, and you're not going to be able to perform at your best. And you're not going to be able to get the adaptations from your training that you're looking for. Okay. So what we want to do is stay out of low power mode with our bodies and be able to get into, properly fueled states, adequately fueled states, so that we can really thrive with the training that we have. And the key piece there is learning to respect our body and be okay with what it looks like, no matter what it ends up being, right? If we're properly fueling, then our body's going to go to the place where it needs to be able to perform at its very best, even if it's not quite what we imagined it to be originally, or what you see, with, the people that you compare to, right? And just know that that's going to be the best way to have a sustainable, healthy relationship with your body and with running in the long term. I was meeting with a young girl earlier this week, and she has a stress fracture right now and is due to, an eating disorder. But she was saying, I just felt so good for a period of time. My times were dropping. I was feeling fast and things were starting to click again. And then it all came crashing down. And that's exactly how it is. So you will get a temporary benefit from restriction. But what we need to remember is that's not going to be the best way to have consistent training over the long term. We don't want your 4-month stint of good training and performances to end up with a fracture or with overtraining syndrome or fatigue and burnout and things that are really hard to come back from.
Absolutely great advice. So folks, a couple of takeaways before we move on here is: one, food is fuel. Make sure you use it that way. And then for your meals, per Jackie, color, carb, and protein. And for snacks, 2 of those 3 things. So make sure you do that kind of stuff. Jackie, let the people know where they can find you and be able to get in touch with you.
Awesome. So I'm mostly on Instagram at Enduura.nutrition, and Enduura is spelled with 2 U's, Enduura. And from there you can click on, there's a link to my website in my bio. I do a couple of different things to work with athletes. So I do one-on-one sessions, and we just work with whatever you have a question about. Those are good, but I also have a group session that's really helpful for athletes. It's geared towards athletes. It's 12 weeks long. We talk about everything you need to know in depth. How much food do I need? How many macronutrients do I need for me specifically? How do I, have a good relationship with my body? We go over different intuitive eating principles and apply it to you as an athlete, because it's a little different when you're an athlete. And really just make sure that you have a good foundation and the knowledge for all the whys of these nutrition recommendations, so that you have more confidence to follow through with them. And that starts my next one in September. So I do have space open for that. If you're interested, then DM me or send me a message through my website, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about it.
Awesome. So just wait to go to her website, guys, while we go through these fun questions, because this is part of my favorite part of the fireside chat. So we'll start off easy. So when you're running, do you listen to music, a podcast, or nothing at all?
Most of the time, nothing at all. Especially like during workouts, sometimes if I'm having a hard time getting out the door, then I'll turn on some Andy Grammer, Ben Rector, or a podcast. I really like listening to the Physical Performance Show while I'm running. It's a good athletics one, but that's the only if I'm really struggling to get out the door. Otherwise, I like to practice, like, how am I going to be thinking in a race? Because lots of races, you just aren't allowed to wear headphones and things like that. So plus It's my time to unplug.
Yes. Yeah, we were talking about that in the green room, folks, just the whole unplugging of things. And yeah, I don't run with any music, and never have, or podcasts or anything, because I want to hear my footfall. I want to enjoy nature. And again, to your point, it's an opportunity to disconnect from the world. This is the most important question of the day. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Yay. Yeah, I'd have it. I'm from Utah, though, so.
Yes, as a New Yorker, the answer is always no. But anyway, to each his own. So then we'll get into some of my other food rules, so to speak. Candy corn. Do you think that's a real candy? Yeah, yes or no?
I mean, it's definitely a real candy. It's definitely not my favorite candy.
Do you have it around the house during Halloween?
No, I really honestly think it's kind of disgusting. I totally respect anyone else's opinion that's otherwise, but I'll take some chocolate instead. Yeah,
you be strong with your opinion. It is not a candy. It's like candle wax.
Okay, I can agree with that statement.
What about Peeps? Are they a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
A big thumbs down. Unless you're putting them in the microwave and watching them blow up. That was one of my favorite things to do as a kid.
Circus peanuts. Not the ones that come inside the packages from Amazon, but those ones that are like orange, nuclear colored.
I don't think they taste that great, but they have a lot of nostalgia, because my grandpa Heaps, that was one of his favorite candies. So it makes me yeah.
Did you all have the strawberry candies that were like in the dish that were wrapped in the strawberry looking package?
Totally.
I wonder if they still make those things. They must. What about red velvet? Is a red velvet thumbs up or thumbs down? Red velvet cake.
I mean, I'd way rather have a brownie than cake, but red velvet's fine.
Yeah, I mean, to me, red velvet cake is really nothing more than chocolate with red food dye. I mean, it's just chocolate.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Favorite book?
Oh, that's a good question. I am not a huge reader. The last book I read was More Than a Body. It's a really good one. I'd recommend it to everyone. Just really helps change your perspective on body image and everything else. But a non-career related book would be The Help. I really like that book. That was one of my favorites.
Awesome. Favorite movie?
I don't know. Right now we're watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that's really fun.
Yeah. Well, you said you have a 3-year-old, right?
Yeah. So not with my 3-year-old. Once he goes
to
bed.
But like Cars or Buzz Lightyear these days?
He just picked his very favorite car movie. We watch Cars on repeat. I never thought I'd have Cars 1, 2, and 3 memorized, but we pretty much do. So.
Yeah. I'm a movie guy, and I love cars. Like when it first came out, I was glued, like if I was your 3-year-old. So I understand the
Mater is
situation.
definitely my favorite character, so I'll say that.
That's awesome. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, if you're just joining us right now, don't worry about it. You can see the whole conversation. It'll be on our Instagram feed here in a moment, but it'll also be on our website, runtrimag.com, and on our YouTube channel. Jackie, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. And folks, by the way, if you go to our website, under the main tab for articles under nutrition, we have articles from Jackie on there with all kinds of great information, from whether chocolate, caffeine, and wine are indulgences, to eating solid foods, to liquids, and everything in between. So make sure you visit our website and get those articles from Jackie. Jackie, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.